Simon Chapman, who's a Professor of Public Health at the University of Sydney, and he joins us in the studio. Thank you very much for joining us. It is so fascinating, isn't it, to watch some of that old footage?
Look, it is indeed. I think it's important to realise that lung cancer, as a disease which is now the leading cause of cancer death in Australia and indeed around the world, was a rare disease at the beginning of last century. And I've read sort of medical memoirs of surgeons who said, look, they were summons to go into a surgery, say, come and see this operation, you may never see one again.
Wow.
And then within 20, 30 years of that, they were seeing it as the most common form of cancer, and of course a very, very fatal form of cancer. 85% of diagnosis of lung cancer, people are dead within 5 years.
Simon, if I may ask a personal question, were you ever a smoker yourself?
I was. Look, I was a naughty boy at school and, sort of kept my cigarettes in the shed and the usual sort of story. Gave up another typical story in my kind of mid to late 20s when I thought, this is a bloody stupid thing to be doing. I didn't really enjoy it. I regretted having started, and indeed 90% of smokers, we know, regret having ever taken it up, and around about 40% will make a serious quit attempt every year to try and do it.
But then fall off the wagon to a degree.
Yeah, but fortunately a lot of them do succeed. There are now far more ex-smokers in the community than there are smokers, and it's been that way for quite some time. And the really good news is that disease rates from smoking are going down. Lung cancer has been on the wane for males in Australia since the early 1980s, and female lung cancer is still rising, but very slowly, and will never get to, I don't think, even half the peak rates that were experienced by males.
Let's talk a little bit about how you've seen changing health policy, because we're sort of having a similar debate around alcohol, a much harder one for the community to tackle. How have you seen it changed? How much more can we do?
Look, I think in the early days, people said, look, it's simply a matter of giving people information, and they'll go, oh, that's bad for me, I better stop. And certainly that has been the absolute foundational basis of tobacco control. If you ask people why they've quit, they will say, I've quit because it's bad for me, I didn't want to die early. But after that, comprehensive policies come in, and you go back to the 1970s when we started restricting smoking in public transport. It took 30 years from that to finally get it out of bars, for example, and really that's the first place they should have started, because that's where the density of smoke
and the accumulation of it is.
Yeah, and the tax policy has been enormously important, and of course most recently we've gone over to plain packaging and led the world.
Simon, you feel that with so many regretting starting and wanting to quit but can't, you're proposing a prescriptive approach, a rationing approach as one of your ideas. Tell us a little more about it, and what sort of response would you get from those who are willingly smoking?
Look, I'm often asked, what's next? We've still got 15% of people smoking, 90% wish they hadn't started, a lot of people making efforts. The way we handle pharmaceuticals, products which are good for us, you or I want to take an antibiotic or an oral contraceptive or something to get rid of malaria or something to prevent malaria. We can't just walk into a chemist and get it. We have to go to a doctor, and we're given what in effect is a temporary license to consume those drugs, and it's called a prescription. And everybody understands that that's a sensible way of restricting access to things which are good for us. But for things which are killing 1 in 2 long-term users, you can get them from anywhere, any petrol station, any corner store, any supermarket, etc. I think that we're probably not far off a time when people will have a little swipe card, and it'll be effectively a smoker's licence, and they will set a pre-commitment level. They'll say, look, I don't want to smoke. At the moment I'm smoking about, say, 15 to 20 a day. How about I sort of allow myself a maximum of only, say, 10 a day? And you would take your card in, you'd swipe it, tobacconists would say, yeah, here's your cigarettes. But if you went back too early, they'd say, no, you're not entitled to another packet for a few days.
Simon, that is stirring up a hornet's nest, potentially. It may have health benefits, but so many are going to say this is an attack on what this society is.
Look, all through tobacco control's history, we've had those attacks. When we were trying to get rid of tobacco advertising, and particularly out of sport, people said, oh, it'll be the end of rugby league, it'll be the end of cricket, it'll be the end of the Australian Open, which used to be sponsored by Marlboro. And of course, none of that happened.
The absolute opposite happened. So why don't we tackle alcohol in the same way?
Look, that's a very good question. We are seeing, some pretty awful alcohol-fueled violence out there. I think it's a time that we, as a society, had a serious dialogue about what we really need to do about that.
Because, of course, the statistics are there. We know them as well, but we don't run the same campaigns about safe drinking.
Yeah, look, interestingly, if you do look at the statistics, you'll see that there is not an increase in young people's drinking, but there is such a level of young people's drinking.
I mean, more the health impact.
Yeah. I mean, something like 4.2% of people aged 12 and over are hammering themselves on a daily basis with dangerous levels of drinking.
12 and over, age 12.
Age 12 and over. So that includes us, people our age. But you multiply that out, and it's a large number of people who are drinking at dangerous levels. Now, that is not going up, but it's still a very, very serious number of people. Simon,
as a public health practitioner and expert, from where you stand and knowing what's come before in regard to the smoking campaign and the change of culture, change of behaviour, does it feel like history repeating, or the start of history repeating with alcohol? And therefore, what can we learn from history that will make this process, this path easier, less traumatic?
Look, I think that education, information is always, as I said, the bedrock of all of this. But what we know from tobacco control is that you need to take a comprehensive approach. You need to look at things like licensing, opening hours, warnings, all of those sort of things, which people might say, oh, that's not going to make any difference at all. But it did make a huge difference with tobacco.
Well, it's an interesting one, and I mean, it is remarkable now. We've had so much response from viewers. One person wrote in and said when he used to go to sporting events, there used to be air hostess type people offering him cigarettes. There was that encouragement.
Yeah, and I mean, the tragedy of it is, if you go to many of the world's poorer nations, you'll still see that. I go to Indonesia, China, places like that quite often, and it's just endemic.
And well, it's interesting, I noticed China's moving to actually ban smoking in public places, which will be a very interesting move for them as well, because I imagine the rates.
That's great.
Simon, great to see you and chat to you about this topic. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Simon.